Um, Hi everybody, or I guess just Dr. Dong. My name is Max Shier, and today I'm going to be presenting on recycling lithium-ion batteries from electric vehicles. This is the same topic as the poster that I produced it earlier, so I'm just copying all of the same information from that poster, and I just put it onto these slides real quick so I can show it off easier. So that's why this looks a little bit blurry, but it's okay. You'll have to bear with me a little bit. Anyways, the widespread adoption of electric vehicles in the U.S. is obviously extremely important to our climate strategy. If we don't adopt, we're not going to be able to effectively fight climate change. However, these new vehicles do present some of their own issues. Issues up and down the supply chain, but for right now, we're going to be focusing on end-of-life issues, mostly centered around the lithium-ion batteries that they use. At the same time that they create these issues, though, there are a lot of potential opportunities for battery manufacturers because they can use these batteries to then bolster their own supply chains, which is obviously extremely critical because battery production does have its own environmental issues. So if we can lower the amount of new batteries that we're making by recycling or reusing old batteries, it's a net win overall. That's great economically, and it's going to be great. It's going to be great environmentally. So that's why we're focusing on this. Anyways, moving on to the introduction. I want to talk really briefly about this concept called the waste management hierarchy, in which essentially just the prevention of all waste is the top priority. But unfortunately, we're assuming that these batteries have to be thrown away, that it's no longer usable. So that means it has to be either reused or recycled, which are the next two chains on the hierarchy, if you will, or the next two steps down the pyramid. So reuse is going to be preferable to recycling. However, unfortunately, the end result is that every battery will have to be recycled, if not thrown away. Hopefully that won't happen, but just eventually it will be spent. So once all of the potential reuse opportunities have been exhausted, you have to look at recycling options. And so that's a lot of what this paper is going to be looking at. We're also going to compare the lithium-ion battery recycling industry to the lead-acid battery, which is an already existing and very successful battery production, or I don't know what the word is, battery stuff. They make a lot of batteries, and they make a lot of money doing it. So we're going to try and figure out what they do successfully and see if that cannot be replicated into lithium-ion battery recycling. Anyways, moving on to the methods. The research paper that I was using for this, it really was just a research paper. So what they did is they assembled a ton of information from a bunch of different sources, and then a bunch of authors who are experts in the field got together as well. I believe this particular paper was led by a British initiative. I don't remember the name of the people who ran it off the top of my head, but it was a very large research firm. And they came together to compare all these various assembly processes, stabilization processes used. And then they just looked at, metal reclamation, what are the best ways to do that, what are the pros and cons of various ways, as well as, like I mentioned earlier, the comparison to the lead-acid battery industry. So let's go ahead and get into it. But the results are kind of long, so we're going to work through it. The first thing that this paper focused on was battery assessment and disassembly. Sorry, I'm just collecting my thoughts here. Basically, if we can avoid assembly and disassembly at all, that's super preferable. Like I said, it's reuse is going to be higher on the chain than recycling. It's better economically because you're having to do less retooling. There's less work involved in it. But if we can't do that, or rather, a way to tell if we can do that or not is it's a thing called electromechanical impedance spectroscopy. Excuse me, that's a hard word. And it's a method of reading the state and health of the batteries. It's extremely accurate, but it's kind of in its early stages of development. So hopefully, as batteries continue to have money poured into them and research or continue to be researched, that process is going to improve, because when it does improve and we're able to get accurate readings of the state of health of the battery at the end of its life, we can better decide what to do with it. We can decide if it has enough life in it to work as a stationary storage device, or if it has to move on to recycling. And some of that's just going to come with battery production, as well as our ability to monitor batteries while they're in use improves. We're going to be able to make the batteries last longer, and again, we're going to get better end-of-life information, which is extremely important to all of this. Anyways, the big issue that you're going to run into once you do move on from battery use and you start looking at battery recycling is that everybody's making batteries their own way. The technology is so new that it's the Wild West out there, right? Nobody really knows what they're doing. So if you look at that graph, it's a little bit hard to see, but it demonstrates 3 different ways that 3 different automakers are producing batteries, and those are all from the same year, I believe, or very similar years. But that should be a Tesla, a BMW, and a Nissan battery. And you can see they're completely and totally different designs. I mean, they share similar basic electromechanical principles, but beyond that, they're completely different, which is a massive issue if you're trying to take these apart, as we'll get into in a little bit. And so that's really one of the big issues of all this, is there's no standard design. And the issue when there's no standard design is then it becomes very hard to automate your disassembly, because what robots are very good at doing is they can repeat a task millions of times, but it has to be the same task in a very specific way, right? If something is out of order, it's going to confuse the robot and it won't be able to do what it needs to do. And when all of your parts look different and they're all connected in different ways across all these different manufacturers, it's almost impossible to automate things. Something that this paper did examine was they looked at potential QR codes, which can be used, or even like some sort of standardized labeling. If you were to say like, yeah, we'll make whatever, all the cathodes are going to be marked red and all the anodes are going to be marked blue, then you can start to teach the robot to look for these. And if it knows that what it's looking at is an anode, it can better disassemble things. And then same thing with the QR codes. If it can read that QR code and then go to a database and say, oh, this is an XYZ part, I'll put it over here, it would simplify things a little bit. But unfortunately, we are not doing that right now, just because, again, this technology is so new. So instead, the current industry practice for dealing with these old batteries and recycling them is not a disassembly process, but it's a shredding process, wherein essentially you stabilize the battery using an inert gas, such as give me a second to pull it up here. I apologize. It's a long paper. They did their homework. We're proud of them. But excuse me, the gas that you could use, it's like a mixture of carbon dioxide and argon, or nitrogen and carbon dioxide. But you're just trying to make it so that these batteries are stable and they're not going to potentially explode, which would be very bad. And then you run them through the shredder at the same time. Other practices that you can use include using halide solutions, or halide salts, in an aqueous solution. And then essentially what you're doing is stabilizing the battery by partially corroding it, so that it's no longer able to effectively transmit electricity, which is a good potential option, except it does hamper your ability to reuse the battery, because obviously you've corroded it now. But like I said, some of those things like halide salts have shown promise in corroding only certain parts of the battery so that we can still reuse most of it. And that's a potential avenue if people are going to try and get more out of this recycling process than what they get from the shredded materials. Halide salts or other aqueous solutions might present a solution. Anyways, though, moving on to battery recycling. Like I said, shredding is a really popular option right now. Also, A similar but slightly different, very popular industry standard right now is pyrometallurgical metal reclamation, which is a fancy way to just say smelting, wherein you essentially throw everything into a smelter, which works at a very, very high temperature, and it just burns everything apart. So um, your really tough metals like your lithium and your cathode material, those are going to make it through the smelting process, and they're going to melt off of each other so that then you can pull them out, um, which is great because this is a very versatile solution. It doesn't require a lot of sorting. You can just kind of throw things into the burner and it figures itself out, but you also lose a lot of battery material when you do this. So all the plastics that were involved in the battery casing and all of the electrolyte solutions are just going to evaporate essentially. You're not going to be able to reuse those. Which brings us to another potential way to do this, which is hold up, let me move on to the next slide. Sorry, I'm not used to PowerPoint. Which is hydrometallurgical metal reclamation, wherein essentially you use another aqueous solution to leach out your valuable cathode materials. And I mean emphasis on valuable for the cathode materials. That's where a lot of the cost for these batteries comes from. So because of that, a lot of work has been put into this method to try and fine tune it and just see which sort of which sort of solutions are going to give you your best results. But unfortunately, it's still not good enough to create a closed loop recycling system, which is the end goal of these lithium ion batteries. Even when used in conjunction with the before mentioned pyrometallurgic metal reclamation, you just lose too much material in the process for it to fully loop onto itself. And that's about all that the paper looks at. I didn't include it into the results section just because it's barely mentioned, but direct recycling, which is essentially the refurbishment. Oh shoot, I did include it. Excuse me. But direct recycling, which is essentially the direct removal of material from your battery, and then the refurbishment, and then reinstall in a new battery, shows a lot of promise. Actually, it's a new technology. It's new with this also very new technology of lithium batteries in general. So it's not at a point where it's feasible or practical in a real world situation. Especially again, once you go back to those issues of non-standardized battery building. So then you're pulling part from A battery, but it's not going to fit into B battery. So there's really no point. Hopefully, as the industry standardizes itself, that can become a potential solution. But as for right now, it's kind of theoretical. And that's about all I've got for you for the results. So we'll move on to the discussions and conclusions. To reiterate, the recycle and reuse of lithium-ion batteries is absolutely critical to the electric vehicle movement. If you were to electrify only 2% of all existing vehicles worldwide, you would have enough vehicles to line up in a row to fit around the entirety of the Earth, which is kind of cool actually that we built that much, but it also creates a massive waste problem. So we're just going to have to get better at everything. Basically, our current battery monitoring systems are going to have to improve so that we can make better end-of-life decisions regarding these batteries. And then the recycling methods that we are using right now, mostly the pyrometallurgical and hydrometallurgical reclamation, they're not going to cut it. They're going to have to improve as well. Those two methods especially start to run into issues when you look at economies of scale that are equivalent to the global automotive market, which is absolutely massive, just because they both require a lot of initial capital to build these facilities, and then it's a lot of energy, especially when you look at the pyrometallurgical to keep those flames running, and it just turns into diminishing returns, right? I mean, the size of the fire that you have to create, or the size of the furnace to burn all these cars and to burn all these batteries, it just doesn't make sense. The math doesn't math, you know what I mean? So the solution is really going to be standardized disassembly processes, similar to what the lead acid battery industry uses. Unfortunately, just because lithium-ion batteries are still so new and they're still in their infancy, it's probably not going to happen for a while. And until that happens, technologies like direct recycling and automated disassembly they're not going to work. There's too many variables for those methods to effectively work in the real world. So yeah, that's about all I got for you. It's going to be an issue, but I have faith that we'll figure it out. And then the other thing that is important to keep in mind is the issue of recycling in the lithium ion battery industry is not just tied to scientific advances like the stuff that we went over here. Just because the industry is so new and it's relatively unsettled, especially when you compare it to other existing industries like automotive manufacturing or the lead acid recycling. I mean, they have systems in place that they've been using for 30 or 40 years now. It's hard to shake up an industry like that. Whereas if a supply chain goes out or if a storage facility is no longer able to holds a certain type of battery, that can have massive ramifications on the development of this whole industry. So it's not just a scientific issue. You have to look at it holistically, and hopefully more solutions lie in there. But until then, the science is going to have to improve. That's about all I got for you. These are my references and acknowledgments. The paper that I used, it was on, I believe it was Nature. Yeah, Nature is where it was published. Published relatively recently as well in 2019, and then an addendum was made in 2020. And then acknowledgements, of course, go to my scientific writing class 291 and my professor, Dr. Dong. Thank you so much for staying with me through all of this, and enjoy your break and end of year. The end.